There is a swamp in Amite County, Mississippi, 5 miles northeast of a town called Gillsburg. Population, barely worth counting. The kind of place where the trees grow so thick the canopy blocks out the sky, where the water sits black and still between the roots, where the silence presses against your eardrums. It is October 20th, 1977, 7 o'clock at night, and in this swamp there is an airplane. What's left of one. A Convair CV-240. Registration November 55 Victor Mike. 29 years old, built in 1948 for commercial airlines that no longer exist. The fuselage is torn open like a tin can dragged through a junkyard. The cockpit is crushed into something no longer recognizable as a cockpit. The wings are sheared clean off, scattered among the sweet gum and the pine. There is no fire. There is no smoke. There isn't enough fuel left in this aircraft to light a cigarette. That is the point. That is the entire point. 26 people were inside this aircraft 12 minutes ago. 2 pilots, 24 passengers, 6 are now dead. The other 20 are scattered across a debris field in the dark, bleeding, broken, calling out for help, that is more than a mile away through brush so dense that rescue teams will have to wade waist-deep through a creek just to reach the first body. Among the dead, the lead singer of the biggest southern rock band on the planet, Ronnie Van Zant, 29 years old. Ejected from his seat, the impact threw him forward. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Dead before the airframe came to rest. Steve Gaines, guitarist, 28. He had been with the band barely a year. The best pure musician any of them had ever played with. Cassie Gaines, Steve's older sister, backup vocalist, 29. She did not want to be on this airplane. She had begged to ride in the equipment truck. She had seen fire spitting from the right engine 2 days earlier and told anyone who would listen that this plane was going to kill them. Ronnie Van Zant talked her into boarding. He told her it would be fine. It was not fine. Dean Kilpatrick, assistant road manager, 29. The guy who made sure the gear got where it needed to go and the band got fed. He is dead. Captain Walter McCreary, pilot. He will never answer questions. Co-pilot William John Gray, also dead. The cockpit absorbed the full force of impact. The NTSB would later determine that section sustained massive deformation, federal language for destroyed beyond recognition. In the darkness, a man climbs out of the wreckage through a hole torn in the top of the fuselage. Artemis Pyle, the drummer, a former United States Marine. His ribs are broken. He can feel the bones grinding when he breathes, blood in his eyes, blood on his hands. The Mississippi swamp doesn't care who you are or what band you play in. He starts walking. Over a mile through the swamp, through the black water and the mud and the undergrowth. 2 others with him, Mark Frank and Kenneth Payton, road crew. All 3 moving through the darkness toward lights in the distance. They find a farmhouse, stumble into the yard. Pyle 6 feet tall, long hair, full beard, covered head to toe in blood and hydraulic fluid and Mississippi clay. He looks like something out of a horror film. The farmer comes to the door with a shotgun, Johnny Moat. He thinks they're escaped convicts, looters, something worse. He fires a warning shot. The .22 caliber crack splits the night air. The bullet goes wide, into the ground or the sky, not into flesh. Pyle keeps moving forward. Ribs cracked, voice raw. He screams 2 words into the October night. Plane crash. The farmer lowers the gun, and for the first time in 20 minutes, Someone on the ground knows that Lynyrd Skynyrd's Convair CV-240 has fallen out of the sky. But here is the fact that turns a tragedy into an investigation. This aircraft did not suffer a mechanical failure. The wings did not fall off. The engines did not explode. The weather was clear. The runway at Baton Rouge was less than an hour away. This airplane ran out of gas. 400 gallons of 100-octane, low-lead aviation fuel were pumped into the tanks at Greenville, South Carolina, on the day of this flight. The NTSB calculated there should have been approximately 620 gallons at departure. The trip to Baton Rouge was 2 hours and 45 minutes. This plane should have landed with fuel to spare. Instead, 6 people are dead in a swamp. The question is not what happened. The question is where the fuel went. And the answer begins not in Mississippi, but in a hangar in Addison, Texas, 4 months earlier, when a man named Zunk Booker walked onto this very airplane, watched its 2 pilots pass a bottle of Jack Daniels back and forth across the cockpit console, and told his bosses at Aerosmith, "Don't touch this plane. Walk away." Aerosmith walked away. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry lived. Lynyrd Skynyrd did not walk away. This is the investigation into why. To understand how 26 people ended up in a swamp in Mississippi, you have to rewind the clock. Not to the moment of impact. You have to go back to the moment someone signed a check. The year is 1977. Lynyrd Skynyrd is an arena act, selling out 10,000-seat venues across the South and Midwest. Their 5th album, Street Survivors, released October 17th, will climb to number 5 on the Billboard chart. Go gold in 10 days. Eventually, go double platinum. But here is the economics of being a mid-70s rock band at peak earning power. You don't fly commercial. Commercial airlines don't route from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana at 4 in the afternoon with 24 passengers and a wall of amplifiers. You charter. And the people controlling the money look for the cheapest option that gets the bodies from point A to point B. The cheapest option was L&J Company of Addison, Texas. They owned one airplane, a Convair CV-240, built in 1948. A twin-engine, piston-driven relic from the Truman administration. A 56-seat airframe designed for regional hops between cities like Tulsa and Wichita. It had been converted into a flying bus for hire, the aviation equivalent of renting a U-Haul when you need a moving company. The lease was signed October 11th, 1977, 3 weeks. Lynyrd Skynyrd Productions, Incorporated, was listed as the operator. A legal distinction that matters. It means the band's production company, not L&J, not the charter outfit, bore responsibility for regulatory compliance, including the flight crew. The crew was hired through Falcon Aviation, also out of Addison. Captain Walter McCreary, First Officer William John Gray. McCreary had 68 hours of flight time in the Convair CV-240. Gray had 38. To put that in perspective, an airline pilot flying a new type for a major carrier completes hundreds of hours of supervised training. 68 hours is what you log in your first 2 weeks. These men were not Convair experts. They were warm bodies with commercial licenses and a willingness to fly a 30-year-old airplane for a rock and roll band. And someone had already noticed. In the summer of 1977, months before the lease, Aerosmith's flight operations team inspected this exact aircraft for their Draw the Line tour. Zunk Booker, their assistant chief of flight operations, arrived at the hangar in Addison with his father. The aircraft was old, the maintenance records were thin, and the 2 pilots assigned to the airplane were sitting in the cockpit, passing a bottle of Jack Daniels between them. Bucher reported back, "Reject this aircraft. Reject this crew." Aerosmith found another plane. The irony cuts deep. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry had been pressuring their management to rent this specific Convair. They liked the swagger of it, a vintage prop plane for a rock band. Their operations team overruled them. That no saved Aerosmith. Everyone knew the plane was a problem. Pyle told Rolling Stone it looked like it belonged to the Clampett family. The Scottish band Nazareth, touring with Skynyrd, fabricated an excuse to avoid boarding. Their bassist called it Gaffa Tape Airlines. Backup singer JoJo Billingsley, off the tour sick in Senatobia, Mississippi, called Alan Collins and begged him to stop flying the Convair. She'd had a dream about it crashing. Nobody listened. The next gig was in Baton Rouge. The bus was too slow. The plane was already paid for. Rock bands in 1977 did not cancel shows because a backup singer had a bad dream. There is something wrong with the right engine. On prior flights, passengers reported flames shooting from the right engine nacelle, a condition called torching, unburned fuel igniting outside the combustion chamber, visible, alarming. Billy Powell, the keyboard player, saw it. Others saw it. At least one passenger asked McCreary about it. His answer: they'd fix it when they got to Baton Rouge. They planned to fix it when they got to Baton Rouge. October 20th, the day of, the band agrees unanimously. This is the last flight on this aircraft. A Learjet after Baton Rouge. Cassie Gaines does not want to board. She wants the equipment truck. Van Zandt talks her into getting on. He tells her it will be fine. He has a way of convincing people. Morning. The Convair sits at Greenville Downtown Airport. The ground crew pumps 400 gallons of 100-octane fuel into the tanks. With residual fuel from prior flights, the NTSB will estimate N55VM holds approximately 622 gallons at departure. Enough for the 2-hour, 45-minute flight to Baton Rouge with reserve to spare. At 4:52 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the Convair departs Greenville, 26 souls on board. Neither pilot, as far as the NTSB can determine, performed a manual check of the fuel tanks. The fuel cross-feed valves are closed. Each engine draws from its own wing tank. If one burns faster, there is no equalization. The clock is ticking, and the right engine is burning fuel like it has somewhere else to be. To understand why this airplane fell out of the sky, you need 3 things: the machine, the men flying it, and the math that killed them. The Convair CV-240 was originally designed in 1946, a pressurized twin-engine short-haul airliner built to carry 40 passengers between regional airports. American Airlines placed the first order. By 1977, the major carriers had retired their Convairs years earlier, replaced by jets. The surviving airframes ended up in the secondary market: cargo haulers, charter operators, and low-budget outfits that could not afford newer equipment. L&J Company of Addison, Texas, was one of those outfits. N55VM had been modified from a standard CV-240 to what some records identify as a CV-300 configuration, retrofitted with more powerful Pratt & Whitney R2-800 engines. The modification changed the fuel consumption profile, but the fuel system remained the original design. 2 wing tanks, gravity-fed through mechanical valves, monitored by analog gauges. Those gauges. This is where the investigation narrows. The Convair's fuel quantity indicators are simple float-type gauges. A float sits on the fuel in each tank. As the level drops, the float drops, moving a needle on the cockpit panel from full toward empty. It is the same technology found in a 1955 Chevrolet. Not precise, not digital. Subject to sticking, lag, and calibration drift. The gauges in N55VM were known to be unreliable. It was institutional knowledge among anyone who flew this airplane. The standard countermeasure is simple. You climb up on the wing. You open the fuel cap. You look inside. You calculate what you see against what the receipts say. You do the math with your own eyes because you do not trust a 30-year-old gauge to tell you the truth. There is no evidence in the NTSB report that McCreary or Gray performed this check before departing Greenville. None. Now. The math. In standard auto lean cruise, each Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine consumes approximately 90 gallons per hour. Two engines, 180 gallons total. 622 gallons provides roughly 3 hours and 27 minutes of powered flight. The trip was filed at 2 hours and 45 minutes. A 42-minute surplus. Adequate under normal conditions. Federal regulations require a 30 to 45-minute reserve. N55VM departed with what appeared to be legal minimums. But appearances matter less than reality. McCreary and Gray either trusted the gauges, trusted the math, or never performed the calculation at all. That's the first failure. The second failure, the right engine. A malfunctioning magneto, the ignition device controlling spark timing, can default the fuel mixture to an enriched setting. The engine runs, it produces power. But it drinks fuel the way a broken faucet drips water. Constantly, excessively, invisibly, unless you are watching the gauges. In auto-rich mode, the Convair burns approximately 25 extra gallons per hour. Run the numbers. With a rich running right engine, total consumption for a 2-hour 45-minute flight jumps to 583 gallons. 622 on board. A 39-gallon surplus. 13 minutes of reserve. Not illegal, but not survivable if anything else goes wrong. The NTSB recovered the magneto from the wreckage, bench-tested it. It functioned normally, but the board acknowledged that an intermittent fault, one that manifests at altitude and resolves upon cooling, could not be ruled out. The torching that passengers witnessed on prior flights remained unexplained by any other mechanism. Had either pilot monitored fuel consumption against elapsed time, a cross-check taught in private pilot ground school, they'd have caught the discrepancy within the first hour, seen the needles dropping too fast, diverted to any one of a dozen airports, refueled, saved 26 lives. They did not monitor. They did not cross-check. They did not divert. One more element. Not mechanical. Contractual. The lease designated Lynyrd Skynyrd Productions as the operator, legally responsible for airworthiness, crew qualifications, FAA compliance. A rock and roll management company that booked hotels and negotiated royalties. They did not employ a single aviation safety officer. Did not have a chief pilot to look at McCreary's 68 hours in type and say, "This man is not qualified to fly 24 souls across 3 states." The lease pushed the regulatory burden onto an entity with no capacity to fulfill it. A paper arrangement designed to insulate the aircraft owner from liability. L&J collected the payments. Skynyrd Productions assumed the risk. And 2 pilots with a combined 106 hours in type and a documented fondness for Tennessee whiskey were the last line of defense between a rock band and the laws of physics. The mechanism was not a single failure. It was a cascade, a malfunctioning magneto that enriched the fuel mixture, A crew that did not check the tanks. A crew that did not monitor consumption in flight. A flight plan with minimal reserve. Cross-feed valves left closed. A lease that placed operational responsibility on a music company. And an industry, the rock and roll touring industry of the 1970s, that treated air travel the way it treated hotel rooms. Something you got as cheap as possible and worried about later. Later came at 6:52 p.m. on October 20th, 1977, when Captain Walter McCreary keyed his radio and told Houston Center the 5 words that ended the conversation and began the catastrophe. We are low on fuel. 6:39 p.m. Central Daylight Time. The Convair is 2 hours and 37 minutes into a 2-hour 45-minute flight. Houston Air Route Traffic Control Center instructs McCreary to descend to 6,000 feet. He acknowledges, then tells Houston he is low on fuel, needs to land at the nearest airport. Houston asks, "Is this an emergency?" McCreary, "Yes. Please give us vectors for Macomb." Macomb Pike County Airport, small regional field, 5,000-foot runway, 15 nautical miles northeast, 6 to 8 minutes, if the engines keep running. The sun set over southern Mississippi 40 minutes ago. The ground below is black. No city lights, no highways, just the dense canopy of the Homachito National Forest and the swampland of Amite County. If this airplane loses power before Macomb, there is nowhere to put it down. Inside the cabin, the passengers know. The engine noise has changed. The right engine is surging and fading. The props are not synchronized. The sound is wrong, and every person on this airplane can hear it. Pyle walks to the cockpit door, opens it. 2 men, terrified. McCreary's face is white. His eyes are wide. He does not explain. He tells Pyle to go back and strap in. Pyle returns, says nothing. His face says everything. The card game stops. The conversations stop. People begin to pray. The cabin of the Convair, which for 2 hours has been a flying lounge, drinks, poker hands, the casual swagger of a band at the peak of their powers, is now a chapel. Van Zandt is on the floor. He gets up, slowly, quietly, does not panic, does not shout, walks to a seat near the front, sits down, says nothing, stares straight ahead. Ronnie Van Zandt knows. 6:42 p.m. McCreary transmits, "We're low on fuel and we're just about out of it. We want vectors to Macomb post haste, please, sir." Post a haste. Please, sir. The politeness of a man who knows he is running out of time and still remembers his radio etiquette. 6:44. The final transmission. The aircraft is out of fuel. The last words from November 55 Victor Mike. When a piston engine exhausts its fuel, it does not explode. It stops. The combustion cycle requires air, fuel, and spark. Remove the fuel and the cycle ceases. The propellers windmill in the airstream, producing massive drag. It is like deploying a parachute from the nose. The right engine goes first. The aircraft yaws. Then the left engine quits. Total power loss. 6,000 feet above the pine forests of southern Mississippi, in the dark. A Convair without engines has a glide ratio of roughly 8-to-1. 6,000 feet covers 9 miles. Macomb is 15 miles away. The math says no. McCreary and Gray lower the gear. Configure for descent. They aim for what they think might be a clearing. They are trying to fly this airplane onto the ground in one piece. They do not succeed. The Convair enters the tree canopy at 138 miles per hour. Rossington will describe the sound as hundreds of baseball bats hitting the fuselage simultaneously. A sustained, escalating, shredding roar as the airframe plows through 60-foot pines. Branches punch through the aluminum skin like fingers through wet paper. Wings catch on trunks and rip backward. The fuselage bucks and decelerates violently as each tree absorbs a fraction of the aircraft's kinetic energy. The cockpit takes the first and worst of it. McCreary and Gray have no crumple zone. The NTSB will classify the crew compartment as non-survivable. Both men die instantly. Van Zandt is in the front. The seat he chose minutes ago. Blunt force cranial trauma. Dead before the fuselage comes to rest. 29 years old. He wrote Free Bird and Sweet Home Alabama and That Smell and Simple Man. He will not write another word. Steve Gaines. Fatal Injuries. 28. His first album with the band was 3 days old. Cassie Gaines survives the initial impact. She does not survive the aftermath. She bleeds to death at the crash site. The woman who should never have been on this plane. The fuselage comes to rest in the swamp. No fire, no explosion. Not enough fuel to produce a flame. The thing that killed them, the absence of fuel, is the same thing that saved the survivors from burning alive. Silence. The only sounds are the ticking of cooling metal, the dripping of hydraulic fluid, and the low groaning of 20 people who are alive, but do not yet know how badly they are hurt. Powell reaches for his face. His nose is nearly detached, his leg sliced to the bone. Collins is conscious. Wilkson has severe internal injuries. Rossington wakes with the cabin door on top of him. Pyle crawls out through the torn roof. Broken ribs. Total darkness. He hears people calling for help. He makes a choice. Walk. Over a mile through the swamp. He and 2 survivors reach a farmhouse where Johnny Moat is putting out hay. 3 blood-soaked figures emerge from the trees. One grabs Moat around the neck. "We got to get them out." The Gillsburg Volunteer Fire Department responds. Locals respond. The first people to reach the wreckage have to cross a 20-foot-wide creek, waist-deep in the dark, then dig through overgrown forest to find the fuselage. Rescue vehicles get stuck in the mud. Farmers load the injured into pickup beds and drive them to the nearest hospitals. At 7:10 p.m., another aircraft in the area picks up the signal from N55VM's emergency locator transmitter. But 18 minutes have already passed, and in those 18 minutes, Cassie Gaines has bled to death in the wreckage. A Coast Guard helicopter arrives over the crash site at approximately 8:10 p.m. But the terrain is so dense, so inaccessible, the helicopter cannot land near the wreckage. The ground teams, volunteers, firefighters, farmers in boots and overalls, do the extraction work by hand, in the dark, in a swamp. By midnight, all 20 survivors are in hospitals across the region, scattered, unable to communicate. Rossington does not learn Van Zandt is dead until his mother tells him, days later, in a room that smells like antiseptic and grief. The wreckage of N55VM sits in the swamp, empty, dark. The fuel tanks that were supposed to carry 622 gallons to Baton Rouge are bone dry. Not a drop. The concert at LSU that 11,000 people bought tickets for will not happen. The Learjet the band was going to acquire in Baton Rouge will never be purchased. The tour titled Tour of the Survivors is over. The NTSB's probable cause statement, issued 8 months later, compresses the entire chain of failure into a single paragraph of federal prose. Fuel exhaustion and total loss of power from both engines due to crew inattention to fuel supply. Contributing to the fuel exhaustion were inadequate flight planning and an engine malfunction of undetermined nature in the right engine, which resulted in higher than normal fuel consumption. 7 words at the center of it. Crew inattention to fuel supply. Not mechanical failure, not weather, not sabotage. 2 men sat in a cockpit for 2 hours and 42 minutes, and neither one watched the gauges closely enough to recognize they were going to run dry. The tanks were bone dry. Cross-feed valves closed. Dump valves closed. No leaks. No structural failure in the fuel system. Every drop left the aircraft through the engines. Burned. All of it. The file is sealed. Gary Rossington, multiple fractures, both arms, both legs, his pelvis. He will carry the band's name for decades as the last surviving founder. Alan Collins recovers enough to play guitar again, forms the Rossington Collins Band, tries to make music without Ronnie Van Zant's voice. It does not sound the same. In 1986, a car accident in Jacksonville kills his girlfriend and leaves him paralyzed. He dies in 1990 at 37. The crash did not kill Alan Collins, but it set the clock. Powell's nose is surgically reattached. He rejoins the reformed Skynyrd. Heart attack, 2009, 56. Wilkson's arm is nearly amputated. He rejoins the band. Dead in 2001, 49. Pyle, the Marine who crawled from wreckage, walked a swamp and screamed plane crash into the October night while a farmer's warning shot cracked the air. Recovers. He says he thinks about the crash every single day. He was never knocked unconscious. He remembers all of it. Van Zant is buried in Orange Park, Florida. His grave is vandalized in 2000. Casket removed. Coffin opened. The family moves the body to an undisclosed location and seals the original site with concrete. Even in death, Ronnie Van Zant cannot be left alone. The album cover, the band standing in a wall of flames, Van Zant at the center, fire licking his legs, is pulled by MCA Records, replaced with a black background. The flame cover becomes a collector's item. Morbid curiosity in a cardboard sleeve. The album's second track is That Smell. Van Zant wrote it as a warning to his bandmates about their self-destructive habits. The drinking, the drugs, the recklessness that had become the band's off-stage identity. The smell of death surrounds you. Van Zant was not a subtle man. He had been telling the people around him, in the clearest language he knew, that someone was going to die. He was right. He just didn't know it would be him. And he didn't know the mechanism would be a fuel gauge. Now, the ghost. The crash did not change aviation law. Every rule that could have prevented it already existed. The rules were simply not followed. What the crash changed was the music industry. Before October 20th, 1977, touring bands treated air travel as an afterthought. Chartered aircraft were selected on price, not safety. Flight crews hired on availability, not qualification. Nobody asked to see maintenance logs or fuel calculations. You got on the plane and went to the next city and played the show and did it again the next day. The Skynyrd crash ended that. Not overnight. But the shockwave moved through the industry with the slow, grinding inevitability of a change that should have happened years earlier. Bands hired aviation consultants. Management companies required independent safety audits. Touring riders began including aviation clauses, age limits on aircraft, minimum crew experience, mandatory maintenance documentation. The things that should have been in Skynyrd's contract with L&J Company became boilerplate. The lesson cost 6 lives to learn. And there is a larger ghost, a cultural one. In October 1977, Southern rock was the dominant strain of American guitar music. The Allman Brothers paved the road. Marshall Tucker and Charlie Daniels widened it. Lynyrd Skynyrd owned it. They were the band that took the raw, swampy, blues-infused sound of the South and turned it into arena rock. Stadiums. Millions of records. The most commercially successful Southern rock band in the world. Then, in 12 minutes in a Mississippi swamp, that trajectory stopped. The band did not just lose its singer, it lost its author. Van Zandt was the lyricist, the band leader, the voice, and the will that held the operation together. He decided what Skynyrd sounded like. He decided what they stood for. Without him, there was no center. Steve Gaines was the future, a guitarist operating on a level most players never reach. His contributions to Street Survivors signaled a new direction, a sophistication the earlier records only hinted at. That future was silenced at 28. In 1987, Johnny Van Zandt, Ronnie's younger brother, stepped in as lead vocalist, and Skynyrd reformed. They toured, recorded, were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. But the creative engine, the unrepeatable combination of Ronnie's voice and Steve's guitar, was gone. It was buried in Orange Park, Florida. It was scattered in a swamp in Amite County. Southern rock retreated from the mainstream. Not because of a single event, but the loss of Skynyrd removed the genre's flagship at the exact moment the industry was pivoting toward punk, new wave, and disco. The genre didn't die. It retreated into a regional identity, a nostalgia circuit. The survivors made a blood oath: never use the name Lynyrd Skynyrd again for commercial gain. That oath held 10 years, then it didn't. Lawsuits, countersuits, a blocked film, a contested memoir, the living fighting over the legacy of the dead, the oldest story in music. But it always comes back to the same place. A swamp in Mississippi, a Convair with empty tanks, a fuel gauge right there in the cockpit, telling the truth to anyone willing to look. Ronnie Van Zandt once told his bandmates he would never see 30. He said it with the casual certainty of a man who had done the math on his own life. He was 29 when the Convair ran dry. Missed 30 by 5 months. He was right about the number. Wrong about the mechanism. He thought the drinking would get him, or the fighting, or the road. He did not think it would be a fuel gauge. He did not think it would be arithmetic. He did not think it would be 2 pilots who could not be bothered to check the tanks. 400 gallons of 100-octane, low-lead aviation fuel, pumped into the wing tanks of a Convair CV-240 at Greenville Downtown Airport on October 20th, 1977. It was supposed to be enough. On paper, it was enough. In practice, with a sick engine and an inattentive crew and a flight plan built on assumptions instead of calculations, it was not. And the silence that settled over that swamp on the night of October 20th, 1977, the silence after the metal stopped groaning and the hydraulic fluid stopped dripping and the last survivor was loaded into the bed of a farmer's pickup truck. That silence has never fully lifted. It is still there, in the trees, in the black water, in the place where the music stopped and the math caught up and the needle on the gauge finally touched empty.